Hello everybody, welcome back. So this is where we left off with our platformer. We can kind of move around. It all works okay, but it's not the prettiest thing to look at. Our player doesn't animate, doesn't look the right direction, and so on. So we're going to animate our player. We're going to bring in some nice backgrounds, foregrounds, and that kind of thing, and just pretty this whole place up a little bit. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring in all the sprites we're going to use. Where you'll find these depends on where you're watching the tutorial video, as I said before. So it'll either be in the video description if you're watching on YouTube, or there'll be a link to click on if you're watching on the blog post or in the IDE. Okay, so I just have them all in a folder on my desktop. I'm just going to go into sprites and hit create sprite from images. Now I'm going to demonstrate just a little fun trick for naming images as you bring them into GameMaker. So if I just bring in S background, that's one of our images we're going to use. You can see it's just brought in that frame as an image. If I go back to create sprite from images and I click S player underscore strip 16 and bring that in, you'll notice it's brought in a 16 frame animation. So how has it done that? How does it know to do that? Well, if I go back here just to create sprite from images and I go to S player underscore strip 16, just hit open. You can see how this image is laid out is one big rectangular image split into 16 parts essentially, with 16 frames of animation all just equally spaced out. But how did GameMaker know to split that into 16 frames? Well, it's just by adding underscore strip 16 to the end of my file name. Tells GameMaker that this is an image strip with 16 frames, and so it will automatically try and divide it into 16 equal parts horizontally, and if it can do that, it will bring those 16 parts in as frames. Okay, and you can do that with any number as well. So I've got a couple here. I've got S player A strip 2, S player R also strip 16, but you can put any number there depending on how many frames of animation you've got, as long as it's all in one long horizontal row. Okay, so that's a fun trick just for bringing these in. You don't have to do it like that. You can bring in multiple images at once, and that will bring them all in as frames of your particular sprite. But it is a nice little shortcut if you want to condense the number of images you have to use and just keep these things in nice big sprite sheets. Okay, so I'm going to bring in a few more now. I'm going to bring in S player A underscore strip 2, which you can see split into 2 frames. This is our jumping up and falling down animations that we're gonna keep both those frames in a single sprite, and I'll show you how to differentiate between which frame to use when we're jumping and when we're falling. Let's name these as we bring them in. So that's going to be S player A, which stands for player A as in air, so player in the air, so either going up or going down. This is just our S player. That's going to replace our S player actually. So let me just leave that as S for a second, and let's delete our original S player, which is just a single frame, and rename this image S player. Make sure to assign, as you're doing this, assign the origin to be middle center. We'll do the same with this one. And go to our player object very quickly, set the sprite to equal S player, so we bring that back in. And let's just bring in all the rest of these. We'll just bring them all in now so that we've got them all in. So let's bring in S player R strip 16. You see that split into 16 as well. This is our walking animation, or running animation, because that's what I've called it, S player R for run. Set that to middle center as well. Add another sprite. S walls. This is going to be our tile sheet for making walls, and I'll show you how tile sets work in a little bit. But S walls will do for now. We don't need to do anything else with this right away. Bring in S clouds. It's just going to be to create some nice little foggy effects. Call that S clouds. And bring in S background, which we already did actually as sprite 2, but we've got it here now. So S background, we'll just delete that other one, and also bring in S grain, which looks like a transparent sprite, which is kind of like a film grain effect that we're just going to put over the top of the entire thing just to make it look a little prettier. And I think we've got everything there. Let me just check. We've got the invisible wall, S background, clouds, grain, invisible wall, the original player we got rid of, player idle, strip 16, player air, player run, and S walls. So we've got everything there. Take a moment now just to check that you've got all of those sprites in and ready to use. Okay, so with those all in place, before we do anything else, I'm just going to bring up our game again that I've still got running here. Something you might have noticed when we built the game in the previous episode is you can do this. You see I can kind of float in the air at the edge of this platform. If I keep walking, I'll fall. But there seems to be an awkward bit of leeway there where it looks like I should be falling and I'm not. The reason for that is the automatic collision box that's been created for our player. If I go to S player now, I know this is a new sprite, but it will have been the same in the old sprite. If I turn on collision mask just by opening this little box here, you can see this box that surrounds the player. That's the automatic collision box that GameMaker has calculated for this player. Now, as you can see, it's calculated all of this space down here and all this space down here as being valid collision space because it's just tried to wrap the sprite in a box as tightly as it can. But because of our dress kind of sticking out a bit, it's done it a bit too far, and therefore we can kind of stand on a wall that's like here, even though like our feet are over here. So we can fix that just by changing mode from automatic to manual, and then we get these little draggy handles, and we can just sort of drag our hitbox to be more representative of the kind of thing we want. So I'm just going to wrap it. It's only really our feet that are that important. I suppose our body needs to fit as well. We'll create something like that. I think makes sense as the collision mask for the player. The other thing to be sure of, however you've set this up, is try and make sure your origin, if I untick the preview mask here, this little origin is moved. You can move it around manually to be exactly in the center. As you can kind of see, our point is here. If I really zoom in, they're exactly in the center of that collision mask, or make sure it's at least a little bit to the left. If you have an even number of pixels and you can't get it exactly in the center, err by putting it 1 pixel to the left. The reason to do that is so that when our character flips around to face the other direction, our collision mask doesn't like flip into the wall. Okay, if we put the origin point too far forwards, say if it was like over here, when we flip around, all of a sudden that collision mask might end up in the wall and we might get stuck. Okay, so make sure that origin point is neatly in the center of wherever you set up your collision mask. So if I play that now as well, yeah, that seems to fit on the top of there. Okay, and now before we go any further, come into O player, which hopefully you've set to now be the new S player sprite. You'll see here where it says collision mask, same as sprite. We want to change that to be S player. You might think, well, that's the same thing, right? It said same as sprite and S player is the sprite. And that's true, but what we're going to do is we're going to add logic that changes our sprite. Okay, it's going to change our sprite to be the air sprite when we're jumping and the run sprite when we're running. And if we leave collision mask as same as sprite, then what it'll do is it'll keep swapping our collision mask between all of these different sprites, whereas we just want to use this one sprite consistently as our collision mask no matter what sprite we're actually displaying. Okay, that stops us having to go into here and make sure that these are all the same and so on, because otherwise if you have different collision masks you might find yourself suddenly getting stuck in walls and all that kind of thing as your collision mask just suddenly changes from one thing to another. All right, it'll cause you all kinds of problems. So the best thing to do is just keep it consistent, make sure that your object only uses one collision mask. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is pop back into our step event. We don't have a lot more code to add to this to make our animations work, but we have a little bit. So bring this up, maximize it if you need to, just fold away that room edit a bit, pressing F8 here just to make our code a bit bigger, just so you guys can see it. You don't have to do that, it's just for the benefit of you guys in the video. And just right at the bottom here, I'm going to add a new section. Okay, I'm going to comment and write animation, as that's what we're going to do here. This is where we're going to control our animation. And basically just depending on what state the player is currently in, whether or not we're touching the floor, whether or not we're moving, we'll change our sprite. Okay, it's quite simple stuff. So I'm going to type if, open bracket, an exclamation mark again, so we're going to inverse this condition, place meeting x, y plus 1, o wall, bracket, bracket. Okay, so this is very similar to what we did up here, where we check to see if we're touching the floor. If place meeting y plus 1 is a wall, only what we've done is we've inversed that. So we're saying if we are not touching the floor. Okay, so if we're not touching the floor, we're going to set our sprite underscore index, you see that turns green, so built-in property of the instance, to equal s player a. Okay, that's our airborne sprite. Now our airborne sprite has these 2 frames in it. Okay, we don't want this to just animate, because that would look pretty terrible when we're in the air. So we're going to have this not animate and simply set ourselves to either be this frame when we're going up or this frame when we're going down. Okay, so come back to sPlayer, come back a little step over. What we're going to do here is type image speed equals 0. That will stop us from animating. Okay, by default our image speed is 1. Then we're going to type if VSP greater than 0. Okay, so if our vertical speed is greater than 0, that means we're moving down. Okay, that means we're, our vertical speed is increasing our y coordinate every frame, we're moving downwards. If that's true, then we want to use our falling sprite, which is the second frame. Now frames are numbered here index wise from 0. So even though this is the second frame and this is the first frame, when you're doing game logic, this is image index 0 and this is image index 1. Okay, so from 0 to 1 rather than 1 to 2. Okay, so if we are falling, we want image index, let me just check again. We want number 1, okay? We want the second frame here. So image index 1 if we are falling. So if VSP is greater than 0, image index equals 1. Image index is going to give us the frame, whereas sprite index gives us whichever sprite, okay? What we can do then is type else image index equals 0. Okay, so it's a fun thing you can do on an if statement. We said if this is true, then set this to 1. But if we write else at the end, what it'll do, it'll say if that is not true, then it'll carry out this instead. Okay, which will set our image index to 0, which will make us fall and jump. So that by itself should actually work if I run this now. We won't have our running or idle animations anymore, but what we should see is when I jump, we go into the jump animation, and when we start falling, we go into that fall animation. So we've made a little bit of progress there. Okay, oh, well, fell to my doom. Oh well. Okay, so that's what happens when we're not touching the floor. What we can do is write else at the end of here to determine what happens when we are touching the floor. Okay, so if this is actually true again. Okay, so if we're touching the floor, what we want to do first of all is set image speed to be 1 again, just in case it was 0 from when we were doing this. And then we're going to do if HSP equals 0. Okay, so we're checking to make sure that our horizontal speed is currently 0, so we're not moving left or right and we're touching the floor. That's when we want our idle sprite. So I'm going to set sprite index to equal sPlayer. If that's not true, it means we are moving, so I'm simply going to set sprite index to equal sPlayer capital R. Okay, sPlayer R. And that's our running sprite. Then the only thing I need to do is make sure that we face the correct direction. Now you'll notice that our player sprite is facing to the right, and our running sprite is also facing to the right. What that allows us to do, because this is a very simple sprite, what we can simply do is flip the sprite to face left without actually having to create a new sprite for facing left for all of our different animations. Rather than having to double the number of animations we have, we can just write code that will flip our player sprite to face the other direction, and it's very easy to do that. So after doing all of this animation stuff and setting ourselves to be the correct sprite in the correct frame, whatever, I'm going to type if HSP does not equal 0, so if we are moving left or right, image x scale equals sine open bracket HSP close bracket semicolon. Image X scale will scale the image horizontally by whatever factor you give it. By default, image X scale is 1. Okay, so it's scaled 1 horizontally. If you set that to 2, it would stretch the image out to be sort of twice as long horizontally. But if you set it to -1, it will stretch it backwards and flip it around. Okay, so it will flip the image to the left. So by changing it between 1 and -1, we can make ourselves face left and face right, depending. And what we've made that depend on is sine HSP, so whether or not HSP is positive, so we're moving to the right, in which case it'll be 1, or whether we're moving to the left, and therefore it's negative, so this will return -1. Okay, so that'll make us face left and right. And that is everything. Again, I'll zoom out a bit just so you can see the whole chunk of code that we've just added there, just from animation downwards. That is everything that you need to get this working. And when this loads, we see we've got our character here, it's got our idle animation going, we can move left and right. We can jump, we can fall, and it all works perfectly. Alright, so we might be done with our code, but we're not quite done with our game. As you can see, it all works. We've got like a player animation, that all looks pretty good. But what I still want to do is clean up these walls and bring in a nice tile set. Also bring in a nice foreground and background for us to work with, okay? So we're going to do the tile set first because that's the trickiest thing. So we brought in this sprite sheet earlier, our S walls image. If I zoom in here, and it might be a little bit confusing to look at. This is a tile set. So if you look closely, you can actually see this is representing a bunch of different corners and shapes and arrangements of basically walls, okay? And what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to basically draw any kind of like wall shape that we want into our level that's going to look a little bit better than every single thing just looking like this, okay? But in order to do that, we need to assign this sprite as a tile set, okay? So I'm going to go into tile sets here and hit create tile set. And select sprite here and click S walls. And it'll bring that in. It's quite a big tile set, this one. Each tile is 128 pixels. So I'm going to set tile width and tile height to 128 each. And you can see the grid has now started to match where our individual tiles actually are. Now, if I go back into room 0 and add a tile layer to our set of layers in the room editor, we'll call it tiles 1. You can name that layer whatever you want. Select no tile set and select tile set 0. Again, we'll rename that in a second as well. We won't leave it there. You can see we now have over here a sort of a palette of tiles to pick from, and I can pick these and I can start drawing them into the room to kind of create whatever shapes I want. However, that is a fairly tedious process, like bringing in each individual tile, like clicking each one. It's better than nothing, but it would take a lot of work for us to keep drawing and redrawing our level that way. Luckily, what we can do with GameMaker is actually set up auto tiles. So if I go to tile set and I hit auto tiling down here, and you see where auto tile templates comes up, we want to hit the plus button next to this 47 because this is a 47 tile set. Now, fortunately, the artist that created this tile set has arranged these in a very handy way for us, okay? Has arranged these tiles in exactly the order that we need to sort of assign these tiles here, because otherwise it could be very difficult to look at and be like, which tile is that, which one is that, and which one is that, and so on. But basically what we do is assign each tile to its correct, whether it's a corner piece, an inside corner, a flat piece, etc. Assign these all together, and then what we can do is use that to automatically draw the correct tile in the right place when we're using the room editor. Because these are all in the right order, and if you want to know the order, this is the order here if you're creating your own artwork, we can just go through and click each one. This solid one though is in the bottom right over here, so I'm going to click that one first. You see that's filled up there, and the reason for that is just at the top left tile of any sprite that you're going to use for a tile set needs to be left blank. Okay, that's just something internal with how GameMaker works. Just make sure that's always left blank. Come back to our tile set. Let's rename this while we're at it. We'll just call this T walls. Okay. Okay, so back down to our auto tiling section. Let's just give ourselves a bit of space. It's a bit confusing to look at. There we go. So you see this is like an inside corner here. So I'm going to click this one, which is what that represents. That's another corner, but for the top right, and that's what this tile is meant to be. And you can see they're all in order, so I'm just going to go through and select them all in order now. Hopefully you get the idea of what I'm doing. I'll just speed this up. Okay, so you might still be wondering, if you've never seen this kind of thing before, you might still be wondering what actually I've just done. What is this actually set up? Okay, it's set up something very, very useful for us. So if I come into room 0 now, back on our tile layer where we were doing this before, if I go to libraries, I hit AutoTile 1, this is the thing we just set up, and I draw into the room. Hopefully that's made it clear what I've just done. Okay, I've set up an auto tile. That means I can just left click and just draw this tile set into the room, and each tile automatically works out what tile it should use based on what tiles are around it, and I can right click to erase as well. So what I'm going to do is basically just draw this same level that we've just that we created here, or something that kind of looks like it, and then move. I'm going to move our walls to kind of match it. Because remember, these walls are the actual physical thing we collide with. The tiles we've just drawn in here are just decoration at the moment. So we'll overlap that, and then what I'm going to do is pop back to our wall object and untick this visible checkbox, okay? And by unchecking that, even though we can still see them here, when we run the game, these objects will skip their draw step entirely, and they won't draw into the game, and they'll be completely invisible. They'll still be there, so we'll still collide with them, but we won't be able to see them anymore. So it'll, if I just untick this as well, it'll look like this underneath, okay? So if we run that now, just to show that in action, just so it's super clear, we can hopefully then see we've got a nice level showing up with none of these big red boxes anymore, and something that looks a little bit more like an actual game. The last thing we're going to do is just make our background and even our foreground just look a little bit nicer than this just plain teal that we kind of threw together really quickly, okay? First thing I'm going to do is come into background, and rather than just changing the color, we're just going to assign a sprite. I'm going to assign this S background sprite, okay? And I'm going to hit the stretch button here, so it just stretches that image to fit whatever our background, just whatever the size of our room happens to be, okay? You've got a few options down here. You can tile a background so that it will tile horizontally or vertically or so on. You can make it move at a particular speed. We're going to use some of those options with some more background layers going forward. So that'll do for now as a nice background piece to this level. And if I untick that, you can kind of see what the level will look like. I'm then going to add another background layer by hitting create new background layer. I'm going to drag this one to the foreground. You see it's just covered everything with white, so that's not exactly super pretty, right? Where it says no sprite, I'm going to click that and click S grain. Okay, and then you see this is put, it might be hard to see on the video, but we put kind of a nice film grain over the top of everything and over the top of the player as well there. Again, I'm just going to hit stretch on that just so that it makes sure it's cleanly fitting to the size of our room. And then just to demonstrate some more features, I'm going to add another background layer over the top. I'm going to set this one to S cloud. You see it's got this huge like semi-transparent cloud over the top. I'm just going to rename some of these layers a bit. Background is fine as background, but this one I'm going to change to film grain. And this one, renaming these just by pressing F2, by the way, just clicking on this, pressing F2 to bring up the rename. Cloud top. The reason I call it cloud top is I'm going to move it up a bit. So you see down here I've got Y offset. I'm going to change that to be, say, -60. Let's go with like -100. Okay, a bit more than that actually. That's maybe negative 200. 250. Yeah, okay, I quite like that. Okay, so we've got those clouds at the top there. But I don't like them just being static. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give it a horizontal speed of, say, -1. So I'm going to move it, just like scroll it to the left. And if I hit this play button up here, play animation, it'll automatically cause any of those things set in the ID to just play out like that, which is kind of handy. You see that's just sort of scrolling along pretty much indefinitely. But you see as it scrolls past here, suddenly there's no more clouds. And that's because what we need to do is tick this horizontal tile button to make sure it tiles infinitely horizontally, so that it'll just sort of appear to wrap around and it'll look quite nice. Okay, so untick the pause. That's the word I'm looking for. Pause that animation, and then I'm going to duplicate cloud top. And change Y offset to be a big positive number instead, so like 350, maybe 550. Just kind of put it along the bottom. We could maybe make it scroll in the opposite direction. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's fine for now, just to show you how that works. Maybe it looks better if they both go the same way, I don't know. I think that looks alright though. I'm going to change the name of that to be cloud bottom. And then I think we've got a fairly decent looking level. Ignore that as well, by the way. Every now and again when this is playing, just the limits of the playback in the editor will cause that to sort of snap back into place and replay from the beginning. It won't look like that in your game, okay? Just have to believe me, it won't. It won't cause the snapping like that. Just have to ignore that when it happens. Okay, so this should all look pretty nice now. So I'm just going to run that game. Let's finish this building and compiling. You can see we've got a much nicer looking little game now. We've got something that looks like an actual platform level, play a character that animates, moves around, jumps, and I'm not very good at that jump. Oh well. You can play around with those numbers to your heart's content. Maybe if that jump is too tricky, you can go in, change jump speed to 11, you know, just make it a bigger number. And that's what I would recommend you do at this point. If you're really new to GameMaker, just once you've got all this in, don't worry too much if you didn't understand how it all worked. Just take your time with it, experiment, learn what certain things do. You can see I've changed this number and now I can jump a bit higher. And so on, and just play around with it, and don't be discouraged if you run into a few errors and problems along the way. It's natural. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned a lot from that. I hope that's helped you out in starting to make platform games of your own. If you want to take the skills you've learned in these two videos a bit further, I have a tutorial series on YouTube. It's about 27 parts long on building a complete platform game. There'll be a link in the description on YouTube, so you can go check that out if you want to take these exact same skills and develop this game into something bigger and larger. Other than that, that's going to be it from me. Hope you all enjoyed that. Hope you all learned a lot, and I'll see you all when I see you all. Thanks, guys.